We've been in Scotland for a month and we've seen some incredible things. But the most incredible thing for me this time was seeing Scotland in the snow. There's just something about Scotland for me. People ask me why I name it as one of my favorite places on Earth. And yeah, maybe it's because we've only been to 20 countries, or maybe it's because it's something special. The first time I came to Scotland was about 4 years ago, at the suggestion of a friend. Lukas and I were going to go to London for our very first overseas trip, and he suggested that we see Scotland while we're there. I really never considered Scotland before, but I wanted to see a lot of the world, and so I said, why not? At that time in my life, I was struggling a lot, and I rarely ever felt happy. It's another story for another time. But when I stepped foot in Scotland for the very first time, I felt something I hadn't in a very long time. I felt happy. And I have never forgotten that feeling. This time in Scotland, we were staying in the city of Edinburgh, but the Highlands up north is my favorite part of Scotland, so it was calling my name and we went. During our drive up, it started snowing, and right when we arrived at our destination, it was snowing hard. Big, beautiful clumps of snowflakes were just falling down like crazy. I got out of the car, and I was in my happy place again. A friend of ours lives near Loch Ness, and yes, the lake where the Loch Ness monster is known to live. So we stopped by to hang out and to film a YouTube collaboration video together. It's always so nice to be able to talk with a like-minded friend. That's one of the hardest things about traveling full-time. You really don't often get the chance to really connect with people. So we had a wonderful time being able to connect, hang out, and talk. The next morning was an absolute dream come true for me. We went on a hike, yes, it was still snowing, to meet some reindeer. The plan was to meet the reindeer, grab handfuls of reindeer food, and to feed them. The technique, we were told, was to keep your arms outstretched to feed the reindeer so they couldn't stick you with their antlers. And let me tell you, when the food was gone, so were they. Reindeer are actually quite feisty animals, but it really didn't take away from how magical that moment was for me. Living in the present is something I am continually working on, as I really find it a struggle to not constantly plan and to think about the future. Doing that makes me feel like life is just passing me by, and all I want for it to do is to slow down. For some reason though, today everything was easy. I felt alive and I felt present. I guess Scotland does that for me. Maybe that's why I love it so much. The next day was all about fitting in as many castles as possible, and I think we accomplished that. A lot of castles in Scotland are now in ruins because of various reasons. Some because of wars, others because at one point they created something called a roof tax, so people tore off their roofs in order to avoid it. Our first stop was the Huntington Tower Castle. Mary Queen of Scots stayed here in 1565 on her honeymoon. And then King James VI, Mary's son, was held against his will here for 10 months until he escaped. He later had them all executed. My favorite part though was the original painted ceilings that were still intact. I guess when someone moved into the castle, they just built a ceiling over this ceiling, so when they tore it down recently, they discovered that perfectly preserved underneath was the ceiling from 1540. They also still had paintings of decorations on the walls, because back then, of course, they didn't have wallpaper. Then we headed for Aberdour Castle. If you've seen the show Outlander, a few scenes were actually filmed here. This is Scotland's oldest standing castle, built in the early 1100s. And here they had dress-up costumes, and of course I had to put them on and act as if I owned the castle. I also really love cemeteries and churches, and they had some right next to the castle. Scotland has some of the creepiest. The skull and crossbones on the gravestones are epic. Our last castle of the day was Craigmillar Castle. This is Edinburgh's other castle, actually. It's just located a mile outside of the medieval city walls. It was used as a way to get away from Edinburgh Castle and have a little more fun or have a more private meeting. Mary, Queen of Scots, used this castle as a safe haven in 1566, and her friend, who owned the castle at the time, Sir Simon Preston, turned on her and trapped her there. We returned back to the city and spent Christmas in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is an amazingly beautiful city with some of the coolest architecture. It literally feels like you're in a Harry Potter film and back in the olden times. We spent some time in their amazing Christmas market drinking mulled cider and getting some hot chocolate. Then we had Christmas dinner at home, where I cooked an epic vegan feast. Our trip in Scotland is over now, but I will never forget the memories. If you have never considered Scotland on your bucket list, you have to put it there, because it will surprise you. It truly is something special.